Well, good evening, this is Hound Dog Steve coming to you on the 18th of April, which is a Wednesday evening. And the first story today is about the Ontario election, and this is Doug Ford, Ford's no tax bombshell. So all of these leaders of the parties, the NDP, the Liberal and the Progressive Conservatives, are making all kinds of outlandish promises. And this is anyone who's making minimum wage will not be paying any income tax on that wage. And all I have to say to Doug Ford is $325 billion. Okay, that is what we owe in debt in this province. And of course it's interesting that now it's coming out that we're paying $1 billion a month in interest on that debt. So that is $12 billion a year just in interest. Now, I don't know where these people are going to get this money from. It's going to be really interesting. And of course here we have the NDP. This is Andrea HOWARTH, and debt and taxes. And so she is saying the same thing, licensed childcare, that hydro bills will be cut by 30%. And but the interesting thing that I thought about this, and of course they're running deficits for at least 4 years to pay for all of this stuff. And okay, the NDP would also run operating deficits for the entire term of office: 3.3 billion in 18-19, 4 billion in 19-20, 5 billion in 2021, 3.6 billion in 21-22, and 1.96 billion in 22-23. Well, when you're paying $1 billion a month in interest, good luck with that. But the interesting thing I thought about this was, and I'm going to read you another little piece in a second. You see right here, see what it says? Sanctuary Province. Okay, now it's funny, it says it in that line, but it actually doesn't mention it at all during the article. And of course the sanctuary province would be to allow people, unpapered immigrants, illegal or otherwise, to enter Ontario at will. And so this leads into our next story, which is Quebec asks federal government for help as number of asylum seekers spikes. Now, Montreal declared itself a sanctuary city last year, right after Donald Trump said that he was going to be kicking out a whole bunch of refugees and immigrants and so on and so forth. And of course this hasn't happened, but a huge stream of refugees has come across the border. And it says, Montreal, the Quebec government stated it's facing the prospect of even more asylum seekers entering the province from the United States this year, and wants the federal government to come up with a plan to deal with the influx. The number so far this year has tripled to 6,074 from 2,000 during the same period in 2017, and is forecast to increase significantly this summer. Immigration Minister David Hurtle said Monday. Even the numbers we're getting from the federal government show us that the situation is different. There's going to be more asylum seekers, so we need a new plan, he said. Hurtle said projections suggest there will be up to 400 crossings a day this summer, compared with 250 in 2017. Well, the answer would seem simple. Don't declare yourself a sanctuary city. And this is of course what the NDP wants to do with Ontario. And this is not about immigrants, illegal or otherwise. It's not about where they come from. It is not about who they are as individuals. I'm sure every single immigrant or refugee has an absolute horror story to tell people. But this is about the weight of numbers and what the economy of the province can withstand. Now, if they've had 6,000 immigrants into Montreal, a city of about 3 million, 3.5 million people, and there are about 32, 33 million people in the whole of Canada, that would suggest that if they're struggling with 6,000 people in Montreal, that Canada would be struggling with 60,000 people. Okay, 10 times 3.5 is 35 million. 35 million in Canada, and 10 times 6,000 is 60,000. So that would be, by just a sort of rule of thumb, ballpark figuring, be the maximum capacity that the entire country of Canada can handle satisfactorily without really crippling the economy. And those are the kind of numbers that we should be looking at. We should not be allowing in more people than we can adequately accept economically, that we can educate, house, and integrate into the broader community and the workforce. It just doesn't make any sense to have people living in hotels, motels, hostel. Down in the Lindsay jail here, we have something like 600 or 700 refugees awaiting hearings in a jail. They've been there for 2 years. They just had a hunger strike. Okay, because they want a decision either way, yes or no. So this is a tenuous situation, and of course as soon as you say something, somebody accuses you of being an Islamophobe, or you don't want immigrants, or you've got white privilege, or blah 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 blah. No, this is just a purely mathematical thing. And you can see, like I say in this article, if they're complaining now at 6,000 in Montreal, how are they going to deal with another 6,000 this year, doubling that number? And of course they're putting pressure on the federal government to chip in money to help them finance the whole situation. And of course we can't leave the Liberals out, and most of Ontario's debt is being dribbled away on day-to-day spending. You know, this is basically like using your credit card for everything that you do during the course of the day. Putting gas in the car, buying a few snacks at the store, lunch, supper, all of this kind of stuff. So our money is being frittered and wasted away to the tune of $1 billion a month in interest, $325 billion in total debt that this province owes, mostly to foreign investors. And you better hope that there isn't some kind of foreclosure, because if there is, they will be coming to collect our assets. Okay, next story. This is a story that I brought to you a little while ago, and here it is. It's in the paper, and the warning signs are right here. And this is interest rate vice may be closing in on home equity lines of credit. These HELOC loans, and you know, when you see the statistic that the average Canadian is using 160% of their disposable income on debt servicing, of course the first thing that jumps into your mind is, how can you possibly do that? How can you pay just about double what your disposable income is on debt servicing and not go bankrupt? Well, of course this is because people have been using these home equity lines of credit, and because interest rates have been incredibly low, they haven't had much to pay to service that debt, and of course because home prices have been basically continuously rising for I don't know how many, probably a decade, nearly 2 decades now, they've been taking the equity out of their homes to pay for the toys. And of course this is great as long as home prices continue to increase, and as long as the cost of financing, debt financing, stays incredibly low. Well, now they're talking about the banks increasing the HELOC rate to between 0.5% and 1%. Okay, and the house prices in Toronto are down by 15% this year. Okay, so that's a sizable drop in the equity in your home, and you're now going to have to pay more to finance that. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how that affects people, because it's going to cripple the economy somewhat, because those people are going to be using now every cent that they earn to try and cover those increased debt expenses. And this is going to play into the election, and so how, you know, when you make all these promises and you don't have people spending in the economy, you're in a tight situation. It's going to be very, very interesting. I'm sure that many of these promises being made by all the parties across the board are going to be broken the minute the election is over. And that is why we need to have a minority government. It would be wonderful to see a minority Conservative government with an NDP kingmaker, and let the Liberal government sit and rot in exile for a few years and lick their wounds and try and think about what they've done in the last 15 years. The deceit, the duplication, the lies, the criminality that has gone on within the Liberal government in the last 15 years is absolutely staggering in this province. Okay, and so a minority government would basically, it would tie the hands of all the parties. And the reason I like that situation at this particular time is that there are so many important things happening around the world. You do not want a majority who can have some kind of knee-jerk reaction to some fleeting situation overseas or in their own country. They won't be selling any of your utilities. You know, Hydro One belongs to the public, not to the government. The government are the managers on behalf of the public, and we were not asked about the sale of Hydro One. And you can see that the Liberal government, if they're pushed into the corner, they will just sell off every public asset there is to satisfy a debt that can never be satisfied. And I'll get into that in another video. So I thought this was kind of interesting. This is another follow-up story. This is the Pope admits grave error, which is of course a rarity. Okay, so this was in Chile last year, and I'm just going to read this little piece here. It says, so far apologies have not been enough to calm the victims of the Catholic Church sex abuse scandals. While seeking to soothe tensions, the Pope drew ire in January after he came to the support of Chilean Bishop Juan Barros, accused of covering up sexual abuse committed by a priest named Fernando Caradima. The Pope later said that his words must have come as a slap in the face of the victims, but he still stood by Barros and even warned accusers that they may be found guilty of slander if they continue to make public statements without being able to provide evidence. Now the Pope is inviting them to Rome to apologize, acknowledging that he was the one who lacked the evidence or truthful and balanced information. In a public letter released on Wednesday, the Pope for the first time admitted grave errors in his response to the scandal and announced a rare emergency meeting with all the Chile bishops. The remarkable shift suggests that the Pope has learned new details of the extent of Chile's child sexual abuse scandal since his trip in January, when he tasked sex abuse investigator Archbishop Charles Cicluna to gather further testimony. In his Wednesday letter, the Pope said he now wanted to re-establish confidence that was broken by our errors and sins. And of course this is going on all over the world. We don't hear about all of the places in South America and Mexico, all the lawsuits going on against the Catholic Church, and yet, you know, here we have the Parliament is asking the Pope to come to Canada and apologize to the indigenous people for the residential school situation in which children were snatched from their parents at a very early age and basically not allowed to speak their own language, indoctrinated into the ways of the church and the British at the time, and but still he will not come over and apologize to Canadian natives. And you've just got to ask yourself why. Why is it possible to apologize to the Chilean victims? And maybe it's because the Chilean victims actually torched a few Catholic churches in protest of the Pope's words. Anyway, they seem to have got a response, and the Canadian natives have not got a response. Next little story, I thought this was kind of interesting. And here we are. This is a Portuguese model, and she says she won't sell her virginity for less than $1.8 million. The Portuguese model is auctioning off her virginity so she can travel the world. A Portuguese model is holding an online auction to sell her virginity so she can travel around the world. Bidding for Penelope, 21, has so far hit $400,000 as wealthy sugar daddies vie to be her first. She's looking for the bidding to reach 1.8 million because she's that type of gal. I'll let you draw your own conclusions on that one. But it is kind of interesting in light of the Me Too hashtag and all of the things about abuse. So, you know, what I'm highlighting here is that there are people on the other side of the equation who are more than willing to put a price on their bodies, and of course Stormy Daniels is another one of those people. And so this is not to tar all women with the same brush, but we must realize that there are those kind of people out there who really don't care about how they get to the end, just as long as they get to the end and there is a big payoff. Just as of course there are some men who are awful abusers, but the vast majority of men are actually quite pleasant. And of course, in the same kind of vein, discrimination in the name of campus diversity, and thankfully we're starting to see these articles in the mainstream media. And of course, how can you have an inclusivity and a diversity program that excludes white people? Got to ask yourself, there's a bit of a contradiction going on there. And this basically Achilles heel of this whole movement, you know, is when you say inclusivity and diversity, that means everybody, not just certain groups of people. And of course, even within the diversity groups on campus, there are divisions within them too. You know, Black Lives Matter don't like Antifa, Antifa don't seem to like anybody, Gay Pride don't like Black Lives Matter, white feminists don't like black feminists don't like white feminists. So, you know, yes, here we go. Fighting for peace is like fornicating for virginity. Hope you like that one. This I like. We need to go to a carbon-free electricity. And of course, how we're going to do this? We're going to do this by going to nuclear power, possibly the most expensive kind of power that you can purchase. Maybe not in its initial building of the reactor, but in the disposal of the radioactive tubes and the material. This all has to be gotten rid of. And of course, they're finding out in England, where they're now taking apart the reactor Windscale. This is one of the first reactors ever built, 1954, and they figure it is going to cost 10 times the amount it costs to build and run that institution, to get rid of all the radioactive material that's within every brick, every stone, every piece of metal, every screw, every rivet has to be taken to a facility in Norway, I believe it is, and properly disposed of, and it is hideously expensive. And when you start factoring that into the cost, that is absolutely huge. Now, I'm not saying that we don't need a more efficient kind of hydro, but one of the big issues that we have firstly is the whole central planning mantra, where the power stations are in one place and it's distributed out through these lines of distribution outside of the city into the rural areas. The cost of distribution is absolutely huge. Now, I would like to go to a far more efficient form of electrical production, but the carbon-free electricity, carbon is not an issue. Okay, carbon in our atmosphere is not warming the planet. I'm going to show you two charts in just 1 second that will illustrate that. Firstly, carbon dioxide is a trailing indicator, not a leading indicator, and that we have been here before, folks, when there was far fewer people on this planet and no cars and no other sources of CO2. CO2. But this is a former NASA scientist, James Hansen, says the world must pivot to renewable energy and nuclear power is a vital part of that shift. Well, thank you very much, James, because you are obviously a spokesperson for the nuclear industry promoting. Go to Fukushima. Fukushima is planning to release all of the radioactive material that's got stored right now into the Pacific Ocean. The entire Pacific Ocean is now contaminated from one reactor in Japan. Are you kidding me? Anyway, let's go take a quick look at those charts right now, and we'll come back and finish off in a second. Okay, here is your first chart, and of course this is 4,000 years before present. Okay, so here is the little ice age. This is the baseline temperature, average temperature. Okay, medieval warming period, Roman warming, Minoan warming. Okay, so this is 1.5 degrees higher than the average temperature today. Okay, and you'll see that we drop down a degree and a half into the little ice age. Okay, this is the Dalton minimum and the Maunder minimum, the Spora minimum, and so we have only reached the mean average temperature for this planet. Okay, we're nowhere near anywhere. You know, this is what's this? This is 3,000 years before present. How many people do you think there were on the planet during the Minoan warming period? And this has all been proven. This is the ice core samples, all been proven. Okay, there was probably around about 10 to 15 million people on the planet at this time. No cars, no factories, no nothing, and yet the temperature rose. Why do you think that is? Couldn't be the sun, could it? It couldn't be the Gulf Stream, the ocean currents, could it? Couldn't be a natural cycle, could it? Okay, this is a second chart. Okay, this is the Vostok ice core samples, and because this goes back a long way, this is 740,000 years before present. And the interesting thing about this chart, let me just bring this in a little closer. A couple of interesting things about this chart actually. Firstly is, now this is your average temperature right across here. How little time we have spent above average temperature. It's all been down. These are all ice ages. These down spikes, these are ice ages. Okay, so this planet has spent way more time in the cold than in the warm. Okay, so if you follow my cursor here, the black line, this is your temperature. This is your temperature increasing. Okay, the red line is CO2. And do you see where the bottom of the temperature line is right here, and the bottom of the CO2 line right here? So you can see that it got warm first, and as it warmed, then the CO2 started to increase in temperature. And then when it reached this peak, okay, the temperature started falling off, but the CO2 kept increasing. And that is what is going on today. That's why the scientists can't understand why CO2 levels are still increasing, but temperature has leveled off. It's not going up anymore. Well, this is because CO2 is a trailing indicator. And so it might be another 10 to 15, maybe even 20 years before you start to see CO2 levels start to fall behind the temperature drop off. And so I believe we are going back into a little ice age, that this is a turning point here, and that we're going to start heading down into another little cooling period. The sun's flaring is slowing down. These are both major weather drivers. The Gulf Stream drives the jet stream. It follows that warm current of water flowing around the planet. And of course, as we're hearing more and more now, you know, the jet stream is out of whack, that it isn't going places that it should be. And they're calling this cool spring weather is based on a jet stream that doesn't know what to do with itself anymore. Okay, so there you go. There's my go-to charts. Take a look. A lot warmer than today. A lot warmer than today. And of course, because we've been coming out of a little ice age, of course the temperatures of course we've been going through global warming. I'm not saying that we haven't. I'm saying that this is not unfinished science. And you can see that there's no flat line. There's no area where it looks like a bar here going this way. Straight up or straight down? Straight up, straight down, straight up, straight down, straight up, straight down. Okay, and these probably will be the areas where you have your most productive, your most stable weather is going over one of these peaks. Okay, so there you go. So I hope you enjoyed those two charts. That they are my incredible go-to charts. They explain everything very simply and very quickly. Now, just a quick comment on the blockchain. Here is the Dilbert cartoon, and I love Dilbert. It's probably one of the funniest cartoons left. It's the only one that can make me chuckle. And so Dilbert says to his boss, "I'd like to work on our blockchain project to keep my skills updated." And the boss says, "I need you to be a team player and maintain our legacy systems until your technical skills become obsolete." Dilbert says, "What kind of team is that?" His boss says, "You'll be on the losing team." So I know this is just a small thing, but this is one of the ways in which you start integrating words and thoughts into people's minds, is through little cartoons and jokes. And here we have, you know, his company is already working on a blockchain project. And if you're not on the blockchain project, you're on the losing team. So they're telling you pretty clearly where blockchain is going. And I had a very interesting meeting last night with a young man who is a blockchain developer, and he is talking about doing some information sessions in a small town quite close to where I live. And so we had a meeting. We had a great time together, and we are going to be working together on this project and filming. And we are also going down to a show in Nevada in October, a 3-day show. I'll be taking my camera with me, and it'll be Bitcoin, blockchain, and everything that goes with that. So please stay with me until we get to that particular issue, and we'll of course be videoing some of Kevin's presentations and the meetups that we are going to be putting on. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed this information, and please, if you have, like and subscribe below. Click that big red button. It really helps when you do. And please, you have a very pleasant week, and we will talk to you very soon. You take care now. See ya.